the sound of the horses racing through her chest as she prepared to walk down the aisle, but the actions of her loyal German shepherd made Emma more nervous. The dog blocked her path, something that had only happened a few times before when the dog sensed danger ahead. But what she was about to discover would forever change her perspective on love and loyalty. The grand church was adorned with white roses, their delicate fragrance filling the air as soft organ music played in the background. Guests sat in hushed anticipation, watching as Emma stood at the entrance, her vibrant pink wedding gown rippling slightly in the breeze. This was supposed to be her perfect day, the moment she had dreamed of for years. But something was wrong. Teddy, her loyal German shepherd, stood firmly in front of her, blocking her path. His strong frame, once filled with boundless energy, now trembled slightly. He wasn't barking, nor was he excited like he usually was in a crowded room. Instead, he let out a low, almost reluctant growl. His amber eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. She hesitated, glancing at her father beside her, who gave the leash a firm but gentle tug. "Come on, Teddy, move," he urged, his voice light-hearted but tinged with impatience. Teddy, however, remained rooted to the ground, his paws pressing firmly against the polished marble floor. His breathing was labored, each inhale and exhale slightly unsteady. Emma knelt down, ignoring the murmurs from the guests, and cupped his graying muzzle in her hands. "What's wrong, buddy?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant echoes of the church. She felt the faint tremor in his legs and noticed the way his chest rose and fell in uneven waves. A sharp pang of worry stabbed through her. This wasn't normal. Her fingers traced gently along his fur, feeling the warmth of his body, but also the slight weakness in his stance. Teddy had never shown fear, not during thunderstorms, not even when strangers approached with uncertain intent. He was her protector, her shadow. If he was acting this way now, it wasn't just nerves. Daniel, standing at the altar, had noticed the commotion. His eyes met Emma's, filled with silent concern. He had worked with German shepherds before in the force, where their instincts had saved his life more times than he could count. And right now, he could see it too. Teddy wasn't just hesitant. Something was wrong. Emma swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs like a distant drum. "We need to get him to the vet," she said, her voice shaking. Gasps rippled through the church. Her mother's voice broke through the tension. "Emma, this is your wedding." She barely heard her. All she could focus on was the way Teddy leaned against her, as if trying to tell her something, and she wasn't about to ignore him. Emma and Teddy have a heartwarming story that's just beginning. But what happens next? Before we continue, leave a like to support this journey and subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Thank you. The towering stained glass windows of the church cast colorful reflections onto the marble floor as murmurs of confusion spread among the guests. The ceremony had come to an abrupt halt, and all eyes were fixed on the bride standing at the aisle, her pink wedding gown rippling softly with every breath she took. Emma's heart pounded as she cradled Teddy, her loyal German shepherd, in her arms. His body trembled weakly, his breaths uneven. She knew something was terribly wrong. Despite her mother's urgent whispers and her father's tense expression, she had made up her mind. She needed to take Teddy to the vet, now. "Emma, stop!" Daniel's voice rang through the church, sharp and unwavering. The groom, an esteemed police lieutenant, a man of discipline and order, stand before the priest, his hands clenched into fists. His dark eyes burned with frustration and disbelief. "If you walk out of here now, then this wedding is over. Forever." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. A wedding, the sacred union of two souls, had never seen such an interruption. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances. Others sat frozen in disbelief. A bride leaving her own wedding? It was unheard of. Emma turned, her gaze locking onto Daniel's. A storm of emotions swirled within her, but her resolve never wavered. "I love you, Daniel," she said, her voice soft yet unwavering. "But Teddy has never left my side. I won't leave his now." Daniel exhaled sharply, his shoulders stiffening, as if bracing for the inevitable. Emma adjusted her hold on Teddy and, without another word, stepped toward the grand wooden doors. The church remained deathly silent, as the sound of her heels clicking against the floor echoed through the vast space. The moment she stepped outside, a cool gust of wind met her flushed cheeks. A taxi was waiting at the curb, as if fate itself had cleared the way for her decision. Carefully, she placed Teddy inside before sliding in beside him. The door shut with a heavy finality, and just like that, she was gone. Back inside, Daniel stood motionless, the weight of his words pressing down on him like an iron chain. The tension in his chest tightened until his legs gave out beneath him. He sank onto the cold marble floor, his mind reeling. This was how it ended? His fingers curled into his lap as memories flooded his thoughts. He had fallen in love with Emma, not because she was beautiful, not because of the way she laughed, but because of her heart, her kindness. He had first met her when she was tending to an injured stray dog, refusing to leave its side despite the rain pouring around her. That moment had changed him. It had made him believe in a love that was selfless and unwavering. And yet, when it mattered most, he had tried to force her to choose between him and the very nature that made her who she was. Shame burned in his chest. He had let pride and anger cloud his judgment. He had let fear of embarrassment dictate his actions. He had let her go, but he couldn't let that be the end. Daniel stood abruptly, turning toward Emma's parents. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice raw with regret. "I should have never given her an ultimatum. I let my pride speak instead of my heart, and for that, I'm sorry." He turned toward the guests, bowing his head. "To all of you, I apologize." The tension in the church eased, replaced by quiet murmurs of understanding. But apologies aren't enough. Daniel lifted his head, his expression resolute. "I need to make this right." Without another word, he rushed out the door, his heart hammering in his chest. He needed to go to the veterinary hospital before it's too late. He needed to be there, not as a groom clinging to his pride, but as a man who loved Emma for exactly who she was. The air in the veterinary clinic was thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic and something far heavier: dread. Emma sat in a stiff plastic chair, cradling Teddy's head in her lap, her once pristine pink wedding gown now wrinkled and smudged. Daniel stood behind her, his expression unreadable, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. The faint murmur of voices from the reception desk faded into the background as Dr. Peterson, Teddy's longtime veterinarian, emerged from the examination room. The older man's face was solemn, his usual warm demeanor replaced with something infinitely heavier. He sighed before speaking, removing his glasses and rubbing his forehead. "Emma," he began softly, his voice carrying the weight of years of experience. "I won't sugarcoat this. Teddy's condition is serious." Emma swallowed hard, her fingers instinctively tightening around Teddy's fur. "How serious?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Dr. Peterson knelt beside them, his eyes kind but firm. "Teddy has been fighting an infection, septicemia. It's spread through his bloodstream and his heart is failing. I've suspected his condition for a while, but today's stress pushed him to his limits." The room seemed to shrink around her. "You mean he doesn't have much time left?" Dr. Peterson nodded gravely. "A few months at best. But realistically, Emma, it could be weeks, maybe even days." The world blurred as tears welled in her eyes. She had known something was wrong, but she had convinced herself that he just needed a checkup, maybe some medicine. But this was the beginning of goodbye. Outside the slightly ajar clinic door, Daniel stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. He had followed her here out of guilt, out of love, out of the desperate need to make things right. And now, as he listened to the doctor's words, something inside him broke. Teddy, the dog that had been more than a pet, the one who had stood by Emma's side through everything, was slipping away. For the first time in years, Daniel felt helpless. He had been trained to handle emergencies, to act under pressure, to protect and serve. But he couldn't protect Emma from this pain. He had nearly lost her today because of his own pride, and now, as he listened to her quiet sobs, he knew what he had to do. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the room. Emma looked up at him, her tear-streaked face breaking his heart all over again. Without hesitation, he dropped to one knee beside her and reached for her trembling hands. "Marry me. Right here, right now." Emma's breath hitched. "Daniel." He shook his head. "I was a fool earlier. I let my ego get in the way of what really matters. Teddy has been with you through everything, and I almost took that away from you. I can't undo what I said, but I can make it right." His voice broke slightly, but he pushed forward. "I want him to be here with us when we say our vows. I don't want to wait, because we don't know how much time he has left. And if he's been your protector, your family, then I want him to be part of our beginning too." Emma let out a sob, one filled with both grief and overwhelming love. She had always known Daniel had a good heart, but this moment, this choice, proved to her that she had trusted the right man with her future. Dr. Peterson, understanding the weight of the moment, stood. "We can arrange it," he said gently. "Give me a few minutes." As the vet stepped out, the small clinic room seemed to transform. Emma stroked Teddy's ears, whispering to him, telling him how much she loved him. Daniel pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, murmuring, "We're doing this together." Within 20 minutes, their closest family and a few of the wedding guests who had followed them arrived at the clinic, the confusion on their faces melting into deep emotion as they realized what was happening. The minister, who had been preparing to leave the church after the unexpected turn of events, was now standing beside the examination table where Teddy lay, watching everything with quiet reverence. Daniel and Emma stood side by side, hands intertwined with Teddy nestled at their feet. The dog, though weak, lifted his head slightly as if sensing the love that filled the small space. The minister cleared his throat, his voice thick with emotion. "Marriage is a bond of love built on trust, commitment, and understanding. And what greater testament to love than the loyalty we see here today?" Emma's mother dabbed at her eyes, while Daniel's father nodded in quiet approval. Taking a deep breath, Daniel turned to Emma, his thumb brushing away a stray tear from her cheek. "Emma, from the moment I met you, I knew you were different. I fell in love with you, not just because of who you are, but because of the kindness you show to everyone, especially those who can't ask for help themselves. Teddy saw it in you before I did, and that makes him a better judge of character than I'll ever be." A small chuckle rippled through the room, lightening the heaviness, but Daniel's expression remained serious. "I promise to love you, to support you, to never take for granted the heart that makes you who you are, and I promise to honor what we build together." Emma let out a shaky laugh through her tears. "Daniel, you drive me crazy sometimes, but I wouldn't want to do this with anyone else. You have been my protector, my best friend, and my partner. And the way you've stepped up today, knowing what Teddy means to me, only proves that I'm marrying the right man. I promise to love you, to stand beside you, and to never let you forget how much you mean to me." The minister smiled. "By the power vested in me, and in the presence of those who love you, including Teddy, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Daniel pulled Emma into his arms, kissing her gently as the small room erupted in soft applause. Teddy, as if understanding the moment, let out a soft, content sigh, his tail giving the faintest wag. The celebration was not the grand ballroom reception they had planned. There were no chandeliers, no orchestra, no towering wedding cake. Instead, there was love, a quiet, powerful love that filled every corner of that small clinic room. And as Emma and Daniel held on to each other, with Teddy lying peacefully beside them, they knew this was the wedding that truly mattered. The honeymoon they had meticulously planned, a week in Santorini, long walks by the beach, candlelit dinners overlooking the ocean, became an afterthought. Instead, Emma and Daniel found themselves somewhere far more meaningful, at home, dedicating every waking moment to Teddy. Their apartment, once filled with wedding magazines and travel itineraries, was now an oasis of warmth and love, carefully arranged for Teddy's comfort. The plush dog bed in the corner of their bedroom was moved to the center of the living room, where the golden sunlight filtered through the curtains. Daniel adjusted his schedule at the precinct, working shorter shifts to be home as much as possible. Emma, who had taken time off for their supposed honeymoon, now used it to sit by Teddy's side, stroking his fur, whispering stories of their adventures together. They adapted without hesitation. Their morning jogs were replaced with slow, gentle strolls, Teddy taking small, careful steps as Emma held his leash loosely, giving him the space to feel free despite his weakening body. Their nights, once filled with discussions about their future, were now spent in quiet appreciation. Daniel lying on the floor beside Teddy, Emma curled up on the couch with her hand resting on Teddy's back, feeling the faint rhythm of his breathing beneath her fingertips. Every single moment was sacred. They laughed when Teddy, despite his exhaustion, still wagged his tail at the smell of bacon. They cried when he could no longer climb onto the couch without help. Daniel found himself carrying him more often, up the stairs, onto the bed, even into the backyard, where Teddy used to chase squirrels with youthful vigor. Teddy, even in his final days, remained the heart of their world. 2 weeks passed in the blink of an eye. It was a quiet spring morning, the kind where the air smelled of fresh blossoms and the gentle chirping of birds welcomed the new day. The sky was painted in soft pastels, the sun just beginning to rise over the rooftops. The world felt peaceful, as if it knew this was a morning that needed tenderness. Emma woke up to the familiar warmth pressed against her. Teddy lay beside her, his breathing slower than usual, his head resting near her arm. She could feel his heartbeat, weak but steady. Daniel, who had woken up moments earlier, sat on the other side of Teddy, his hand resting lightly on their loyal companion's back. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They both knew. Tears welled in Emma's eyes, but she refused to let them fall just yet. Instead, she leaned down, pressing her forehead gently against Teddy's. "We're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're right here." Teddy's tail gave a small, almost imperceptible wag. His eyes fluttered open, just for a moment, as if he were trying to take one last look at the two people he had loved the most. His body relaxed completely, as if he had been holding on just for them. Daniel exhaled, his voice thick with emotion. "You were the best boy, Teddy." Emma cradled his face in her hands, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. "Thank you for everything." And with one final breath, Teddy slipped away, surrounded by nothing but love. The apartment felt unbearably quiet that night. The absence of Teddy's paws tapping against the floor, the soft rustle of his breathing, the warmth of his presence. It was all gone. Emma sat on the floor, staring at his empty bed, her heart aching in ways she never thought possible. Daniel knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "He knew how much we loved him," he murmured, "and we knew how much he loved us." Emma nodded, a tear finally slipping down her cheek, but it still hurts. Daniel pressed a soft kiss to her temple. That's how we know it was real. They sat there in silence, hand in hand, hearts heavy but full of gratitude. Because love like Teddy's didn't just disappear. It stayed. Forever. A year had passed since that quiet spring morning, when Teddy had taken his final breath. Time had softened the sharp sting of grief, but not a day went by without Emma and Daniel feeling the absence of their loyal companion. His old leash still hung by the door. His favorite blanket remained folded on the couch, and his collar sat on a small wooden shelf beside their wedding photo. Teddy had been more than a pet. He had been family. He had taught them love, loyalty, and the importance of cherishing every fleeting moment. And even in his absence, his lessons remained. It was for that reason that, on the anniversary of his passing, they found themselves walking through the halls of the local animal shelter. The air was filled with the sounds of barking, soft whining, and the hopeful eyes of countless dogs watching as visitors passed by. Some were young and eager, tails wagging, noses pressed against the metal bars. But Emma's heart ached for the ones who didn't rush to greet them. The older ones, the ones with graying fur, the ones who had been passed over time and time again. That's when she saw him. At the very end of the row, curled up on a tattered blanket, was Rocky. His golden fur was peppered with white, his deep brown eyes heavy with the weight of years spent waiting. He didn't jump up like the younger dogs, didn't bark for attention. Instead, he simply lifted his head slightly, watching them with quiet curiosity. Emma knelt in front of his kennel, extending her hand through the bars. Rocky sniffed it gently before pressing his nose into her palm. Daniel crouched beside her, his heart tightening at the familiar warmth of an old soul looking for a home. He glanced at the small card attached to the kennel door. 12 years old, he murmured, reading aloud. Owner passed away. No family left. Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with the same certainty she had felt the day she had chosen Teddy all those years ago. He's the one. Daniel didn't hesitate. Then let's bring him home. Bringing Rocky home felt like a continuation of a story rather than the beginning of a new one. He settled into their lives as if he had always been there, finding comfort in the same sunlit spot on the living room floor where Teddy used to nap, resting his head on Daniel's knee in the evenings, following Emma around the kitchen with soft, expectant eyes. They knew their time with Rocky wouldn't be long. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the love they could give him in whatever time they had left. Every walk became a slow, thoughtful journey, letting Rocky set the pace, allowing him to sniff every flower, feel every breeze. Every meal was a celebration, filled with his favorite treats. Every morning, they greeted him as if it were his first day home. Because love wasn't measured in years, it was measured in moments, and they would make every moment count. On the anniversary of their wedding, Emma and Daniel found a new way to celebrate. Instead of a lavish dinner or a romantic getaway, they spent the day at the shelter, donating supplies, volunteering their time, and helping match abandoned dogs with loving families. It became a tradition. Every year on that same day, they honored Teddy's memory, not with sadness, but with love. Years later, when they had children of their own, they passed down Teddy's lessons. They taught their kids that love meant loyalty, that kindness could change a life, that family wasn't just who you were born to, but who you chose to love. Their children grew up knowing the warmth of a dog curled at their feet, the joy of unconditional love, and the responsibility that came with it. And when Rocky's time eventually came, he passed just as Teddy had, surrounded by love, his head resting on Emma's lap, his last sight being the family who had given him a home when he needed it most. As the seasons changed and the years passed, Emma and Daniel continued their mission. They would always open their hearts to the ones who needed them, always find room in their home for a soul longing to be loved. Because Teddy had taught them something they would never forget. Love doesn't end. It only finds new ways to grow. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like to show your support. And don't forget to subscribe for more moving stories like this. Your presence here truly makes a difference.